All right, so everyone, get ready, because today we're diving into one of those debates that's been going on forever, like since the dawn of deep thought, pretty much.
Oh yeah, definitely a classic.
Poetry versus philosophy, it's like the ultimate intellectual showdown.
Yeah, like Ali versus Frazier, but with, ideas.
Exactly, and to really set the scene, let's go back in time. Imagine ancient Athens, the marketplace is buzzing, you've got philosophers just hashing out these huge ideas.
And in between those guys, you have poets captivating crowds with their stories about gods and heroes and stuff.
Right, a real battle for people's attention.
Absolutely, but here's the thing.
Yeah.
One of those big-time philosophers, Plato, he wasn't exactly a fan of poetry.
Wait, seriously, Plato, the OG philosopher.
Oh yeah, he wasn't just like, meh, not my thing. He straight up wanted poets banished from his ideal city, exiled.
No way, that's brutal. I mean, talk about canceling someone. What was his problem with poetry? Did you just have a bad experience at the poetry slam or something?
Okay, not quite. To understand Plato, you gotta understand his whole jam, he was all about these things called ideal forms.
Ideal form?
Yeah, picture perfect, unchanging concepts like truth, beauty, justice.
Oh, okay, like the ultimate blueprints for everything.
Exactly. And for Plato, this physical world we're in, it was just like a cheap knockoff compared to those ideal forms.
I see. So where does poetry fit into all of this?
Well, poetry being all about the real world, emotions, that kind of stuff.
Right.
For Plato, it was focusing on that cheap knockoff instead of the real deal, the ideal forms.
So he thought poetry was distracting people from finding the real truth.
Bingo. He saw it as this thing full of emotions, subjective interpretations, leading people away from pure reason, away from those perfect ideal forms.
So instead of eating your philosophical broccoli, you're binging on poetic candy.
Yeah, exactly. Not exactly brain food, according to Plato.
Okay, I get it, but come on. Poetry can be so powerful, so moving. There's got to be some value in that, right?
Yeah.
I mean, don't we learn about ourselves through stories and emotions and all that?
You're starting to sound a lot like Aristotle.
Aristotle.
Oh, yeah, and this is where it gets interesting.
Okay, I'm listening.
Aristotle, get this, was actually Plato's student, but totally disagreed with him on the whole poetry thing.
Oh man, student-teacher rivalry, I love it. So what did Aristotle think? Spill the beans.
Well, he basically argued that poetry, especially tragedies, was good for the soul.
Good for the soul, how so?
He believed that experiencing these strong emotions through art, even the tough ones like fear and sadness, it actually allowed us to release them in a safe way.
I see. Like a good cry after a sad movie. You always feel a bit better after, right?
Exactly. A good emotional cleanse.
So Aristotle saw poetry as a sort of emotional gym. You go in, live some heavy feelings, and come out stronger on the other side.
Exactly. And he had a name for it, catharsis, this purging of emotions. And he thought it could lead to self-awareness, balance, maybe even a more harmonious life.
Oh, wow. So it was like Plato was all about the strict philosophical broccoli diet for the mind. And Aristotle was like, hey, a little poetic ice cream now and then won't hurt.
Love that analogy. That's a good one.
Right. So we have Plato, team logic, worried that poetry will lead us astray down the emotional rabbit hole. And then we've got Aristotle, team feel it all, saying, no, embrace those emotions. They're part of what makes us human.
Exactly. And you know what? That brings up a huge question for us today. How do we find that sweet spot between reason and emotion in our own lives?
That's the million-dollar question, right? But I think I'm already feeling more balanced just by thinking about it. But before we get too deep, I want to know what you think. Are you team Plato, team Aristotle, or somewhere in between?
Let us know. Hit us up on social media. Tell us what you think.
Yeah, we want to hear from you. And while you're pondering that very important question, we're going to dig even deeper into all of this. So stick around.
We'll be right back.
All right, so we're back and ready to unpack this whole reason versus emotion thing a bit more.
Yeah, it's a juicy one for sure.
Totally. And it's funny because last time we left off with Plato, basically wanting to send all the poets off to some deserted island with no Wi-Fi.
Right, he was all about logic, pure logic.
Like a Vulcan from Star Trek or something.
Exactly, but Aristotle, he saw things a bit differently.
Oh yeah, he was all about those feels.
He was, and he recognized that poetry, it doesn't work on the same level as philosophy, like they're different beasts.
How do you mean?
Well, philosophy, it's all about dissecting, analyzing, breaking things down.
Right, getting to the nitty-gritty.
Yeah, whereas poetry, it's more about synthesizing, evoking, putting things together in new ways.
So instead of taking things apart, it's like building something new.
Kind of. Yeah, think of it like this. Poetry uses language not just to, give information, but to create an experience for the reader or listener.
Right, it's like it hits you in the feels.
Exactly. It stirs your imagination. It connects with you on a deeper level. And when a poem really resonates with you, it's not because it's like presented a logical argument or anything.
It's because it's like tapping into something deeper.
Yeah, like a universal feeling or truth that we all kind of share.
That makes a lot of sense. It's like a philosophy textbook might explain the concept of love, but a Shakespeare sonnet can actually make you feel it.
Exactly. And it's not to say that one is better than the other. They're just different ways of approaching the world, you know?
Yeah, different tools for different jobs.
Exactly. Each with its strengths and weaknesses. Like Plato, he was worried that poetry would mislead people with its emotional appeals.
Right. Too much heart, not enough head.
Yeah. But Aristotle, he saw those appeals as like a pathway to greater understanding, to becoming more self-aware.
So it's not so much about good versus evil, but more like a spectrum of how we approach knowledge and experience the world. And I guess we all move along that spectrum in our own lives, right? Sometimes we need logic and reason. Sometimes we need emotion and intuition.
Absolutely. Think about it. Like when you're making a tough decision, you might weigh the pros and cons, be all logical about it.
Right. Make a list, do the research.
Exactly. But then you also probably consider your gut feeling too, how the different choices make you feel.
Oh, totally. Sometimes my gut is louder than a heavy metal concert.
I hear you.
So where does this leave us? I mean, do we have to pick a side? Team Plato or Team Aristotle? Are we doomed to wander around lost in a sea of emotions?
Well, I don't think it's about picking sides, really.
Okay.
It's more about recognizing the value of both poetry and philosophy and how they can actually work together.
Oh, interesting. Like a tag team.
Yeah, kind of. Like they can both help us understand ourselves and the world around us better.
That makes a lot of sense, a more balanced approach. But I'm curious, if Plato were alive today, what would he think about our modern world?
Oh, man, that's a great question.
It seems like we're just bombarded with emotional appeals everywhere you look. Ads, social media, the whole 9 yards. Would he just totally lose it?
Yeah, that's a good point. He might be horrified by just the sheer amount of information and stimulation we're exposed to these days.
Right, it's like sensory overload.
Totally. And so much of it is designed to play on our emotions, to manipulate us.
But do you think he'd also see how poetry and art can help us deal with all that? Like, cut through the noise and connect with something real?
I think he might. Yeah, I think he'd see the potential there for sure.
So even in our hyper-rational, tech-driven world, there's still a place for poetry. That's kind of reassuring, actually.
Oh, absolutely. I think poetry is more important than ever.
Really? Why?
Well, because it reminds us of the power of language, the power to move us, to challenge us, to make us feel truly alive, you know?
And that's something we need more of these days.
Definitely. It's a way to explore what it means to be human in a world that often feels so superficial.
I love that. Maybe instead of banishing poets, we should be giving them medals. We need their voices, their insights, their ability to make us feel and think deeply.
Couldn't agree more. In a world that's always rushing, always focused on speed and efficiency, poetry forces us to slow down, to pay attention, to connect with ourselves and the world around us.
It's like a much-needed antidote to the constant barrage of information we face every day.
Exactly.
And hey, maybe by embracing both poetry and philosophy, we can find a path to a more balanced and fulfilling life. Who knows?
That's a beautiful thought, and it really speaks to the enduring power of these two disciplines, you know?
Yeah.
To challenge us, inspire us, and help us make sense of this crazy, beautiful world.
Beautifully said. Now, before we get too carried away with all this deep thinking, let's bring it back to you, our awesome listeners.
Yes.
Where do you stand on this age-old debate? Are you Team Plato, raising a glass to reason, or Team Aristotle, embracing the power of emotions? Hit us up on social media and let us know.
We want to hear your thoughts, and if this conversation has, piqued your interest in the power of poetry and philosophy, we encourage you to, go explore those topics further.
Yeah, there's a whole world of amazing literature and philosophical thought out there just waiting to be discovered. And who knows, maybe you'll even be inspired to write a poem or a philosophical treatise of your own. But
yeah, who knows?
But before you do that, be sure to hit that subscribe button.
Yes, subscribe.
That way you won't miss any of our future deep dives into all sorts of mind-bending topics. We're here to make learning fun, engaging, and maybe even a little bit poetic.
We try to keep it interesting.
We do our best. So until next time, keep those brains buzzing and those hearts open to new ideas. And remember, a dose of poetry and philosophy can do wonders for the soul.
Couldn't have said it better myself, Word.
See you next time for another deep dive.